We continue on now to our Friday feature Movie Spotlight, where we review some of the latest releases at the Korean box office and online. And of course, it is our critics who will be doing that, so let's bring them in now. First, we have Jason and Bechervaise to my right. Hello, Jason.
Hello, Jeonju.
And we have Darcy Paquet to my left as well. Hello, Darcy.
Hi, Jeonju.
Okay, so we have one major Hollywood blockbuster to look at and one small Korean independent film to look at this week. We start with the Hollywood release, and it is one of the most eagerly awaited blockbusters of the year. It is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. It has the same phonetic title in Korean, and it is, of course, produced and starring one of Hollywood's most iconic and successful stars, Tom Cruise. So, Jason, can you tell us more about this? Can you bring us up to speed as well on this hugely successful franchise, particularly because it pays homage to the earlier films, right?
That's right. So especially, the first film, Tom Cruise has been front and center of these movies. It's based, of course, on the 1966 series created by Bruce Geller. And Cruise, as I'm sure all our listeners are aware, he plays Ethan Hunt, agent for the IMF, the Impossible Missions Force. The first film was released back in 1997. Directed by Brian De Palma, which is an interesting choice for director.
Sure.
And I think this latest film definitely harks back to the first one. You've got trains, you've got these European locations, even the interiors, the characters. And actually the plot as well, you have to concentrate. I wouldn't say it's overly convoluted, but you certainly do need to concentrate like the first film. And then the second movie by John Woo, it was very successful in 2000, but I think there is a general consensus that it's rubbish, and it's widely viewed as the weakest. And you got J.J. Abrams, who came in to direct the third film in 2006. Now this is probably the darkest of the series, I would say, and that's probably due to arguably the best villain of the series, played by the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, and that set the stage for the events in the subsequent films, especially the sixth film, Fallout in 2018, which is, I think, probably the best of the series.
Right.
And you got the fourth film, Ghost Protocol, directed by Brad Bird. You got that incredible sequence on the Burj Khalifa, which I think really sparked off this series of films which focus on the spectacle. And you got Tom Cruise basically trying to do the impossible, whether it's climbing up skyscrapers or hanging off a plane.
Right, he's trying to outdo himself with each film, it seems.
Exactly. And then so that also marked the beginning of the collaborations between Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie on the Mission Impossible films anyway. He co-wrote the fourth film, Ghost Protocol. Right. And then he came on to direct and write the later one, so Rogue Nation 2015. So it's become very successful, largely down to Tom Cruise, I think, and also a number of different directors.
Well, thank you for that whirlwind summary of the series so far. Darcy, can you tell us more about this film? I understand that there's a lot going on, as Jason hinted, and it's also quite long, I understand.
It is long. I do recommend a trip to the restroom before you start watching the film. It doesn't feel slow at any point. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of spectacle. As Jason mentioned, the story is not hugely simple. There are different elements to it that kind of fit together. It's interesting they bring in kind of AI as this existential threat to humanity, which is something that obviously is very much in the news and which is kind of real life scary. So that adds an extra dimension to it. But yeah, it's a mixture of familiar characters, introducing some new characters. We move from Abu Dhabi to Rome. They have a great car chase sequence in Rome, so of course they drive down the Spanish Steps.
As you have to.
Right, and then a big train sequence on the end. So you wouldn't say that it's really breaking new ground, but generally it was just well done, so that throughout this very long running time you always kind of feel entertained.
Right, I believe it's 163 minutes, so it's definitely a lengthy film. So Jason, I feel with every successful Mission Impossible film that Tom Cruise makes while he produces, the expectation not to disappoint fans builds, it feels like. We almost expect it to thrill us and excite us, but then there's a small part of us that worries that it might not meet those expectations. So what's the verdict then? Has he done it again? Has he managed not to disappoint us this time?
Oh yeah, he has. I mean, it's a great film. Certainly, I think the writing's excellent. It really kind of comes together. It's really clever. You've got all these characters coming in.
Interesting, because the Mission Impossible, they're not known for their writing as such.
Right, and the way it pays homage to the earlier films is really clever, especially the first one. And so I really liked it. It also has kind of references almost to James Bond as well. The kind of the scenes in, I think, Venice, and then you've got the relationship between Ethan Hunt and the female characters, which are really interesting, really powerful in this film. I have a couple of quibbles. I think visually it's not as spectacular as some of the other films, and I wonder whether that's because this is part one. Maybe it's all coming in part two. I mean, some people may disagree with me. It is visually, pretty it is certainly pretty amazing, but at the same time I was like, well, you have this train sequence at the end of the film which goes on for 30 minutes, and I was trying not to read reviews, but they're all talking about this train sequence, and I'm like, yeah, it's okay, but there's a lot of CGI, and actually I think the best sequence in the film is in Abu Dhabi, the airport. That's fantastic. And it's not really kind of set piece kind of orientated. It's just really well put together in terms of the screenplay, the performances, and just the use of locations. But yeah, no, there's a lot to like in this film. I definitely want to see it again. The other quibble I have is the film begins on this Russian submarine and they're speaking in English. Whereas later on in the film, they're in Italy and they're speaking Italian. And I'm like, what is this? I be consistent. If you're going to speak English throughout the whole film, and actually
the first couple lines of dialogue are in Russian, and then for
it
some reason
switches.
They all switch to talking in
and
English.
That really annoys me. They do that in so many of these, even Spielberg does it in Munich, and
it's something that we have grown out of, I think. But I think that is perhaps a minor quibble.
It's a minor quibble. Yes. I'm being a little bit.
I have other minor quibbles.
Okay, well, Darcy, tell us about what you thought of the film.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I liked it, and I like this kind of film. I think that it delivered pretty much on expectations. I liked it better than the previous film in the series, and I'm looking forward to seeing part two. I mean, it doesn't really leave you on a total cliffhanger, but there's obviously more that needs to come for the story to wrap up. I mean, my minor quibbles are there's this thing they do with dialogue where they have 10 people in a room, and one person starts a sentence and the other person says the middle of the sentence, and then the next person says the end of the sentence. And it's
it jumps around quite a bit. Yeah, it's
it's something that they're doing just to kind of spice up the dialogue, but it's so kind of unrealistic and unnatural. Really I guess I'm hypersensitive to dialogue.
Well, especially because you're a subtitle expert, of course. Yes.
I totally agree with that. It's just these little things that just can be rather annoying, and it definitely doesn't destroy the film or all the viewing experience. It's just one of these issues I have with some Hollywood films.
But I feel the fact that we're talking about minor issues shows that the film is successful overall. And of course, there's part two coming in about a year's time, so we won't have to wait too long for the sequel either. So that was a Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Let's move on to our next film. It is way on the other side of the spectrum compared to Mission Impossible. It's a small independent film called Hill of Secrets, or 비밀의 언덕 in Korean, that focuses on the life of a 12-year-old girl. So Darcy, what can you tell us about this film?
Yes, this is a debut film. The director is Lee Jieun, and she made a couple of short films before making this. And it premiered last year at the Berlin Film Festival. There's a special festival devoted to kind of films about and for children. It traveled to a lot of festivals around the world, and now it's finally reaching theaters for its theatrical release. It's set in the 1990s, and when the director may have been the age of the main character, so that you do get the sense that there is a lot kind of personal within the story, and it follows this young girl who. She's very ambitious. She wants to be kind of, one of the standout students, and to make a good impression on her teacher. She manages to get elected class president, and partly because of this proposal that they, create this box where everyone can kind of put in a note with kind of their secret wishes or comments or, and she does have this sense of leadership, but then, things develop, other people kind of move into the class. She starts getting the feeling that her position is threatened. And throughout all of this, there's the fact that, she comes from a lower class family, and, kids, as we know, can be kind of sensitive to that kind of thing. And so she's in this situation where she's a little bit embarrassed to tell people about the fact that her parents work in a market, and so she starts to create this fantasy around herself, and telling these lies that sooner or later you expect will come back to haunt her.
Sure, Jason, films about childhood are everywhere, of course, and there have been some notable ones in Korea recently, The World of Us, The House of Us, and Kids Are Fine. How does this film compare? What do you make of it?
Yeah, no, I really like this film, as a parent myself, and my son is a little bit younger than this girl in the film. She's 12 years old. Really spoke to me. I mean, she's clearly, having issues with the fact that her parents work in this market, and she wants to show the class that her parents are from, wealthier backgrounds, and how it affects her psychologically, and it really gets into her kind of mindset, and that's really hard, to follow like a child doing that, and it's one thing to try and get an adult to do it, but to get a child to do it, that's something else entirely. And I found it really moving because, for the first half of the film, you follow, she's like, oh, no, you don't do that, don't lie, don't lie. She kind of keeps lying. She's like a habitual liar. And but you can sympathize with her. You understand why she's doing it. She's not. It's not villainizing her or anything like that. And by the second half of the film, there's this point where she comes to this realization what she's done. She enters this contest, and it's a really beautiful moment, and it's really, really moving. You've got other kids in the class as well, and I found it a very emotionally involving film, and I really responded to it, and it's honestly, I think it's one of the best Korean films of the year for me.
Wow, okay. So I have to
really
say, even me just watching the trailer, that moved me quite a bit. Darcy, this has been quite well received by local critics as well, I believe. Did it resonate with you too?
I mean, it's funny. I saw this film after, it had screened at some festivals, and to a certain extent, I was kind of not looking forward to watching it because it felt very familiar to other Korean films that we have seen before. And so I was a little bit skeptical going in, and during the first half, I maintained a bit of that skepticism, but it did, it takes a turn halfway through, and I don't want to say what it is. It's one of those situations where you don't want to give away what the film reveals, but ultimately, it kind of centers around this writing contest, and it opens up this question of, like, if you're an artist and then you're making a film about your own life and people that you know, and to what extent can you separate kind of what you're writing as a separate piece of art, and to what extent might it kind of affect other people in the real world. And the way that it handled that felt really surprising and new to me, and so that in particular left a really strong impression on me. I mean, the film on a whole, it's really well done. The actress, the child actress,
great, yeah.
Moon Sung-ha, I mean, this isn't her first film. She's kind of impressed us in the past already, but
she's one to look out for.
She's well capable of kind of handling the drama of this film and then really pulling you in. So for me too, it's one of the kind of highlights of recent Korean cinema, and I'd encourage people to go watch it.
Right, so that's The Hill of Secrets, or Pimire Ondak. Definitely one to seek out then, it seems. That's where we're going to have to leave it. So Jason, Darcy, thank you as always for your reviews, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, have a great weekend.
Take care.